Hello, historians. Welcome to the Unit 5.10 podcast notes on the Paris Peace Conference. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to argue if you believe the Paris Peace Conference could have fairly ended World War I. You'll show your mastery of this objective by using the college-level format to fully write an introduction paragraph and also to outline two pieces of cited and analyzed evidence for your Body 1 and Body 2 paragraphs. Let's get started. I'd like you to go ahead and take a moment to pause the video to analyze the following map. Please take a look at the countries that are located in the Allied Powers Alliance, Central Powers Alliance, and also the neutral countries. Also keep your eye out for where the Western Front is located and where the Eastern Front is located. Once you're ready, go ahead and resume the video. Keep in mind that even though this map focuses on Europe, World War I was in fact a global war, meaning that there were countries in all other places of the world that were also involved in these alliance systems and also contributed to the war during the 4 years. Now, before we actually get into our objective for today, we need to review two key events from the Unit 5.9 notes. The first key event is going to be why the United States finally decided to join World War I. In 1917, 3 years into World War I, the United States finally decided to join the Allied power side. They finally decided to join, one, for economic reasons. The United States was very frustrated that Germany had been stopping them from trading with Great Britain. This loss of trade was causing a huge economic downfall for the American economy, and the United States wanted to be able to solve this problem. The second reason was for revenge. The United States was very upset that the Germans had sunk a passenger ship known as the Lusitania. The Lusitania was a passenger ship that contained many Americans on it, and when it sunk, those Americans perished. The third reason was that the United States was able to intercept, meaning get a hold of, a telegraph. This telegraph was the Zimmermann telegraph, and it actually was supposed to be a secret telegraph that Germany sent to Mexico. In this telegraph, Germany was trying to convince Mexico to sneak attack the United States and completely wipe her out. If Mexico could wipe out the United States, Germany promised Mexico land in return. That land was land that Mexico had lost to the United States many years ago when America had started imperializing. These three events are going to anger the United States against Germany so much that they will push the United States to give up their neutral stance and join World War I on Serbia's side. If you need some additional help with why the United States joined, feel free to watch the supplemental video I've posted on Google Classroom, or feel free to review your Unit 5.9 notes. The second event we need to review is why Russia backed out of World War I before the war even ended. Now, if you remember back in the Unit 5.9 notes, you learned that Russia was ruled by a czar, and a czar is basically the word for king. Tsar Nicholas II of Russia, which we see here, was not a very popular leader. He made a lot of choices before and during World War I that not only caused his soldiers to lose battles, but also caused his people to starve and hate him. And so eventually what happens is during World War I, the people will revolt against him during the Russian Revolution. Now, the Russian Revolution has two parts. Part one of the revolution is when the people are able to force Tsar Nicholas II to abdicate, meaning step down from the throne. And when he stepped down, the revolution did not end, it continued. It continued because the people of Russia were basically fighting each other over who should be the next leader of Russia. Now, part two of the revolution ends when this guy right here, Vladimir Lenin, gains power of Russia. And when he gained power, he made many big changes. The first big change he made is he decided to change the name of the country. The country would no longer be called Russia. He decided it would be called the USSR. And the USSR, he decided, was backing out of World War I. According to Vladimir Lenin, the USSR was in too much economic, political, and social chaos and could not continue to fight World War I. It needed to back out and focus on taking care of itself. If you need some additional support, I've also placed another supplemental video for you on Google Classroom that you can watch for some information on why the USSR backs out of World War I. Now that we understand America joining and the USSR backing out, let's take a look at what happens. Now, the USSR has backed out of World War I, and the Central Power countries of Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, and Turkey feel pretty confident that with a huge enemy now out of the war, they can possibly win. Doesn't quite happen that way. What actually ends up happening is that Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire end up having to back out of the war as well. These two countries were heavily defeated battle after battle towards the end of World War I because of all of the help the United States is now able to provide the Allied powers. At the same time, Austria-Hungary started to lose a lot of its battles as well. And when you start to lose a lot of battles, your soldiers suffer, your people suffer, things get pretty bad in your country, and ultimately what happens is the leader gets blamed. And so in Austria-Hungary, there was a huge revolution as well, and the revolution basically caused the leader of Austria-Hungary to lose power, and ultimately the people chose to take Austria-Hungary out of the war. Now, with three of the big players in the Central Powers gone, Germany is now feeling a lot of pressure all by itself in Europe. And ultimately what happens is Germany, as a result of being attacked on two sides, as a result of fighting a two-front war here on the Western Front and then also here on the Eastern Front, they pretty much start losing so many battles towards the end of World War I that the people of Germany also decide to revolt against their leader. Now, the leader of Germany is called a Kaiser, which means king, and Kaiser Wilhelm II, because of a revolution, was forced to abdicate as well. The new German government that took over decided on November 11th, 1918, that they needed to somehow take a temporary break from World War I. And so what this new German government did was that they signed an armistice with the Allied powers. Now, an armistice is just a temporary time-out agreement that says fighting will stop for a certain amount of time. Maybe a week, maybe 2 months, maybe 7 days. After that deadline, if the countries have not agreed to officially end a war with a peace treaty, then the war will start up again. Germany was hoping that with this armistice, this temporary time out, they could buy themselves some time to reorganize their military strategy, calm the people, gain enough resources, and hopefully come back into World War I and win it. Now, Germany's plan to kind of stall and use an armistice didn't end up working because World War I will officially end with the creation of multiple peace treaties. These peace treaties are going to be created through 1919 and 1920, but specifically on January 18th, 1919, the world power countries gathered at Paris at a Paris Peace Conference. Now, what's important to notice is that these world power countries are basically the countries after World War I left with the most power. If you're a winning country of a war, you're going to have the most power. If you're a losing country, you're not going to have the most power. So pretty much on January 18th, 1919, the strongest countries that were left over that had won World War I got together at the capital city of France, which is Paris, and there they had the Paris Peace Conference. We'll call that the PPC in our class. Now, during the PPC, these world power strong countries sat down together to try to create peace treaties that would officially end World War I. Whether or not the Paris Peace Conference is successful is going to decide whether or not World War I ends fairly or unfairly. Whether or not World War I ends quickly or drags out a long time. So lots of people were very, very, very nervous about what types of decisions were going to be made at the PPC and whether or not these world leaders could quickly create treaties that they quickly agreed on that they would quickly sign. Now, out of all of the treaties created at the PPC, we're only going to focus on one for this class. And the treaty that we're going to focus on is the Treaty of Versailles. In this class, we'll often refer to the Treaty of Versailles as the TOV. Now, in order to understand what the TOV said and how the TOV created the end of World War I, we need to understand the mindset of the governments that went to the PPC. So let's talk about some of the PPC details. Now, at the Paris Peace Conference, about 37 countries were invited. And these 37 countries, they sent about a total of 200 delegates, 200 government representatives were at this meeting from 1919 to 1920. Now, even though 37 countries attended, not all of the countries were treated and seen the same. There basically was a ranking system, and depending on your rank, you would either have more power at the conference or less power, more speaking rights or less speaking rights, more people paying attention to you or nobody listening to you. So let's take a look at that ranking system now. Here's the ranking system, and we can see that at the top of this ranking system are the countries considered world powers. Basically, the most powerful countries who had the most money, the most soldiers, the least war damage after World War I. These were the countries that were basically on the Allied Powers Alliance that won World War I. Some examples of world powers would be the United States, France, and Great Britain. The second class of countries was called the minor powers. Minor power countries are also on the Allied Powers Alliance, so they had also been on the winning side of the war, but they are considered to have less power because they have less money, less soldiers after World War I, they have more damage to their territory. Some example of minor power countries would be Serbia and Italy. The very, very last rank of countries at the PPC were the colonies. Now, these colonies were invited to the PPC because they had helped the Allied powers win. So, for example, we know that Great Britain is an imperialist power bully, and we know that it bullied countries like India and China. Because India and China helped Great Britain during World War I, either voluntarily or by force, that meant that the colonies, China and India, were invited to the PPC as the victims that had helped their imperial power, Great Britain. Now, as a colony, you really didn't have a whole lot of power at the PPC, but you were invited. Out of all of these types of countries, world powers, minor powers, and colonies, out of all of these different countries invited to the PPC, there was a group of 4 countries specifically that we're going to focus on in this lesson and in the future lessons. Those countries were known together as the Big Four. They were called the Big Four because they kind of made the most decisions and had the most voice during the conference. The Big Four is Great Britain, a world power, France, a world power, US, a world power, and Italy. Now, if you take a look, I've put in parentheses that during the PPC, Italy will be mostly ignored. They're going to be mostly ignored because they are technically a minor power country. And so even though they were one of the countries that was able to voice their opinion, they did not voice their opinion as much as these 3 world powers because these 3 world powers pretty much kind of ganged up against Italy and ignored her, even though Italy was on their alliance during World War I. The losing nations of the Central Powers, for example, Germany, Austria-Hungary, Bulgaria, Ottoman Empire, those losing nations of the Central Powers were not immediately invited to the PPC, and neither was communist USSR. Because the USSR had backed out of World War I early, the Big Four had decided that even though they were technically on the willing alliance of World War I, they should not be immediately invited to the conference. The conference should be attended only by countries that really stuck out the entire war. Now, this portion of our podcast is about to end. Once it ends, please go ahead and click on the second link for part 2.